I served on CFIUS, truth be told, in the early 1990s, which you can tell from my gray hair that was a long time ago. And I was actually, as again, much younger. And friends of mine would say, let's go out for a drink tonight. And I say, no, I can't. I've got a CFIUS case. And of course, they thought I meant syphilis case. And that was a running joke among my friends for quite a while. And I don't use that joke very much anymore. But, it's interesting that CFIUS is shrouded in mystique. And you still read a lot in the newspapers about it, that it's a mysterious organization within the government. And it's not mysterious. It's because the data that are reviewed are proprietary data regarding, commercial transactions. And so you're not going to get, it's like any investment bank, frankly, conversation that takes place. And so, when you see that in the newspaper, I think you should sort of realize that's more for press consumption than what reality is about how the agency operates. It's an interagency group. It's housed in Treasury, and it now has about 10 different agencies that sit on it. I sat on it when I was the assistant U.S. trade rep for investment, trade, and services. Today, most of the people who serve are of similar rank at the assistant secretary level, and only when the assistant secretary level folks who actually sit on the committee are not able to come to a decision one way or another, which I'll get into in a second, it gets kicked upstairs, so to speak, to the president. And those actually are very rare cases. And so again, there's the misperception, because we only read about sort of the cases where a president gets involved, that it becomes very controversial. But the lion's share of decisions that CFIUS makes are not terribly controversial. Now, as Ted said, that this most recent article for the International Financial Law Review that I wrote comments on a requirement that CFIUS has, is to publicly disclose to the Congress with blinded data, again, for the reasons I spoke earlier, about what the activities of CFIUS have been in the previous year. And I'll talk a little bit about what that annual report shows. But I would say, relative to the days when I sat on CFIUS, there was not as much formality with respect to the rules, with respect to the procedures, that now is the case. And that's largely because, and this will be a theme of my talk, is CFIUS has become more of a whole of government approach. And that is, I think, accented or illustrated by the fact that Capitol Hill has gotten very involved with legislation that really now outlines in a very comprehensive way what are the procedures, what are the rules, what's the disclosure issues that CFIUS must operate under. When I was a member of CFIUS dates back to 1975 from an executive order by then President Ford. Very little known agency. When I worked on Capitol Hill prior to coming to the White House on the Omnibus Trade Bill of 1988, we put in a provision in that trade law called the Exxon Fourier Amendment. Two senators, one representative and one senator, Senator Exxon from Nebraska, I believe. And that was the first sort of legislative foray for the Congress to give more systematic oomph to CFIUS and set out some criteria about what are the kinds of transactions, what are the criteria in which to adjudicate on transactions that may pose a national security risk to the United States. And that is the main objective of CFIUS, is to opine as to whether or not a proposed transaction represents a threat, national security threat to the United States, and if so, how can they be ameliorated? And at the extreme, they may well be prohibited. But in the intervening period when I sat on CFIUS to today, it's really become quite mature. And as Ted mentioned, the title of this new article, it is really become more mature, and it's quite agile. Because in the US, our policy with respect to inbound foreign investment generally is of a welcoming nature. And the question is, how do you balance openness for foreign investment with any restrictions that need to be put in place to mitigate risks that might come with an inbound foreign investment, either in a particular sector or from a particular geography, a particular country, or even the intersection of those two with respect to which sector and which country. And that really goes, to the heart of what CFIUS does, is making those kinds of balancing decisions. One of the other elements that jumps out of these new data is that CFIUS has significantly stepped up its practice of looking at non-notified transactions. Remember, I said in the beginning that even if you don't come before CFIUS, CFIUS reserves the right to unwind a transaction if it believes that national security risk, has been exacerbated or pronounced. And so the number of staff at Treasury, where CFIUS is largely housed, has been increased significantly. And the amount of non-notified transactions that were reviewed has increased probably by a factor of almost 2. It's almost doubled, and that is again sending a market signal to create an incentive for investors that if you even have an inkling that you are dealing with a non-controlling investment in real estate and high technology sectors, you are extraordinarily well advised. And this is what I tell my clients, whether they're in corporations, whether they're in private equity industry, you have nothing to lose but to go to CFIUS. Because they're going to treat, I think they treat people pretty fairly, but the worst that could happen is if you don't go to CFIUS and then you have to unwind a transaction. That's not good for a whole set of reasons. So I think one of the messages is that the government has gotten more serious and more systematic about how to use this agency to try to protect the national security interests of the United States. Now, the China numbers obviously are very interesting in this report. Remember, I said that their numbers have declined significantly. It turns out that in the last couple of years, the largest number of transactions that have come before CFIUS, Japan has been the leader, followed by Canada, the UK, Germany. So these are the source countries that have come before CFIUS. That doesn't mean that they represent a risk, but it shows that that's the amount of inbound investment coming in from source countries. And what's interesting about Japan is when I was working on the Hill, a part of this 1988 trade bill, for those of you who might remember, then the big national security threat was Japan. China was nowhere to be seen as a national security threat. But now when you look at the sort of the big foreign investors coming into the United States, you might get the impression, well, it's just the Chinese, but it's not. It's the Japanese, as I said, the Canadians, the Germans, the Australians, and the like. And in fact, in the last year for which these data are available, 2020, China ranked as the 7th largest investor in the United States. Again, the other countries I mentioned, Japan and the like, were ranked 1 through 6. That's probably news to a lot of people. But again, I think it's because it could be the case that the Chinese have lost interest in investing in the US because of macro reasons in terms of macro politics. But it's also the case that they have refined the kinds of transactions that they're interested in the United States so that it doesn't get into a territory where national security risks would be mitigated. So, I think that's a very important message to take away from looking at these data. The last point that I would make about these data is when you look at the sectors that are most reviewed by CFIUS in terms of potential inbound transactions, it's still sectors that are really considered to be sensitive. So the largest sector is electric power generation, where the most inbound foreign investment deals come before CFIUS, followed by computer systems designs, software publishing, aerospace products. So these are all areas, all sectors where people obviously want to make investments in the United States because we have very good sectors. But it also is showing you that the companies and the countries who are coming into the US on these sectors tend to be more on the democratic side, advanced democracies, and quite friendly with respect to the US's objectives in the world economy.